Galloway, you are running for the role of Mayor of London.
Yes.
In what is a very competitive race. Amongst the biggest issues in this election will be how to deal with London's housing crisis and transport. So let's just deal with housing first. As mayor, you've announced that you would want to ensure that 50% of all new homes built are affordable. How would you pay for the building of these new homes?
I wouldn't pay for them. The developer would pay for them.
But in that case, how would you ensure that 50%?
It's the law. I make the law.
And,
I decide whether someone gets permission to build or not, and that permission will only be forthcoming if half of the houses they build are affordable houses.
Okay.
And I define affordable as half of the average rent.
I see. And do you have a specific target? Many candidates have a target of how many homes they would like to build as mayor. Do you have a target?
It's 10 times more than the best of theirs. We need 2 million council houses built in London. Never mind the issue of the 50-50%, never mind the issue of my compulsorily purchasing empty homes. 600,000 of those are in London, and they're not homes at all. They're bought as safety deposit boxes for hot money, mainly from abroad, in many cases by crooks. These are important, but they won't solve the crisis. The only way to solve the crisis is to build hundreds of thousands of council houses, which are by definition affordable, which are democratic. You get to sack your landlord every year at the council elections. We have 2 million people in London living in the private rented sector. They move on average every 3 years. Their children going to new schools, making new friendships and so on. This is a time bomb ticking away in London. And the only way to solve it is a mass program of council house building.
Would these homes be built on brownfield then?
Brownfield, but some would be on greenfield and some would be up. We are just a few hundred yards from probably the finest tower block in the world, the Goldfinger Trellick Tower. People come from all over the world, architectural students and aesthetes of all kinds, to see how beautiful it is.
Yep.
Now that they're on sale, because all council houses have been put onto the market, they change hands at £750,000. There's no reason why tower blocks should be ugly, should be unmanned, should be without the proper care and maintenance. If they are, as they would be if I was the mayor, that becomes a partial solution to our housing crisis.
Okay. You recently said that although all the candidates have promised to tackle the housing crisis, you are the only one that we should trust. What makes you think that?
Think it or say it. I think it, and I said it because I think if you were to ask people if I'm a political leader that tells the truth, the vast majority of them would say yes. They might not like my truth, they might not even agree with it, but they know that I say what I mean and I mean what I say.
Okay. And so are you saying that this doesn't apply to your opposing candidates?
You're having a laugh. You are having a laugh. My opposing candidates are characterized by flip-flop, flip-flop. They say one thing to you and a different thing to her.
Okay.
One thing yesterday, a different thing tomorrow. And everybody knows that. Okay. The Evening Standard had a poll this week in which they put a series of words to people and asked if they applied to Mr. Goldsmith and Mr. Can. In Mr. Can's case, the two most popular words chosen were shady and untrustworthy. That's what the public think.
So let us move to the issue of transport. You've said that as mayor, you would want a renationalisation of the railway network. Is this will of renationalisation, is it motivated by the idea of people's railway, as Jeremy Corbyn puts it, or are there also some economic advantages of renationalisation?
Well, both. The railways were a people's railway and then they were privatised under Mrs. Thatcher, and they need to be brought back into public ownership, both because that's the proper thing to do, but also it's the efficient thing to do. British Rail, before you were born, when it was owned by the people, received 1/3 of the annual subsidy that the private railroad operators like Richard Branson, Virgin and the others 1/3 of the subsidy. So Richard Branson gets 3 times the public money to run the railroads badly as the British Rail, publicly owned, received before privatization. So we have an overexpensive, overcrowded, sometimes unsafe railway network in private hands, and we're paying triple the money for the privilege.
You have called for a ban of Uber in London, but Uber is a popular, practical and competitive business in one of the most competitive cities in the world. Is it backward thinking to ban it?
Well, it may be popular, but only until something disastrous happens. The Alton Towers Big Dipper was popular until people lost their legs and their limbs in an accident caused by deregulation and low standards. In the case of Uber, I'm sure I don't have to tell you, but the cases are almost beyond enumeration of people who are not qualified by one standard or another to be taking the public around in their often substandard motor cars. So we need a private hire sector. We had one before Uber came along, but Uber has dragged standards to the bottom. Now there are no standards at all. And that is the model of 21st century neoliberal capitalism that Boris Johnson and David Cameron believe in. It's helped that the very people who they believe in give them money because they believe in it. So it's a circular piece of corruption.
But black cabs are considerably more expensive than Uber cars, Uber taxis, due to the length and difficulty of the studies to become a black cab driver. For example, the aspiring cab driver needs to learn about all the London streets, and it's a long process which nowadays seems rather useless when everyone has GPS phones. So don't you think maybe that you would need to reform the black cab system to maybe lower the costs, shorten the studies, and try and reform the Uber business to actually have an equal kind of a...
Well, I'm open to negotiation on some of those points, but the reason why black cab drivers have to reach the standard they do is for the protection of the public. It's not just that they have to learn every street. My own son-in-law is doing exactly that on a motor scooter this moment. It's that they have to be trustworthy individuals. They have to have good character. They have to be background checked. Their vehicles have to be properly insured. Their vehicles are regularly inspected and can be inspected by being flagged down with an inspector at any time on the road. None of these apply to Uber transport. Now, Uber is a tax-dodging $50 billion US corporation that pays no tax, that says it isn't a private hire company at all. It's only an app on the telephone. So I'm hardly an enemy of technology, as you'll see from my blockchain proposals. I'm way out ahead of the others on these. But don't pretend you're an app when you're in fact the world's biggest taxi company, and then avoid paying tax in the very country that you're applying for hire in.
See. Could you talk to us about your policy on free travel for young Londoners and key workers?
All children, college, university students, school students in their final year, the ones that were robbed of the education maintenance allowance, the ones that have been crippled by a tripling of the tuition fees, we need to put something back into that sector to incentivize them to study, because study is not a cost, it's an investment. Study is an investment by the public in our own young people that will be repaid many times over the course of their subsequent working lives. Now, most of it will be on buses. I'm just looking at a bus that's gone past us, and like almost every bus in London, it's almost empty. It's almost empty at rush hour, it's almost empty at off-peak hours. So if your next question is what's the cost of that, the cost of putting people in an empty bus is nothing. We're already paying for the bus. So much of this free travel will be on buses, but at designated times during the day, it will also be on the underground.
You argue that under Boris Johnson, London has become a city run by the rich and for the rich. How so?
Well, Boris Johnson has run London for people who look like him. I mean, literally look like him and live like him. It's been run in the way that we now see crystallized in the Battersea Power Station development, where only 8% of the houses are deemed affordable houses, and affordable is deemed to be 80% of the prevailing rent in that area. That means you have to be rich even to get the affordable house, never mind the unaffordable house. That's, I think, a perfect example of how Boris Johnson has run London for the rich.
Is there anything else that you would have done differently than Boris Johnson as mayor?
Yes, when the Panama Papers broke and it was revealed that a very significant number of people in this country, including some of the highest profile people in this country, including the Prime Minister of this country, were engaged in a conspiracy against the public good by hiding their wealth in Panama, in the Bahamas, and other tax shelters. I, as the Mayor of London, would have been on their doorstep with a bucket demanding their fair contribution. I would set a tone in the city which is very, very different to the tone that Boris Johnson has set.
A recent polls in this election suggest that you will earn a little support from voters. How have you and how will you continue to affect the discourse in the election?
But these polls are bogus. My name is not included in the polls. People are not.
We have one poll with your name in it.
But the questions to the people did not include my name. If anyone says they're voting for me, they have to volunteer it themselves. So we've got affidavits of people who've been polled by 7 different polling companies. And in all 7 cases, my name was not included in the poll. So these are bogus polls. Even if they hadn't been, they would hopelessly misrepresent the level of support that I have deep within specific communities. I'll give you an example, a ridiculous one because they don't vote. But if you polled London and 1% of London were Jehovah's Witnesses, you would only poll 1 Jehovah's Witness. But if every Jehovah's Witness was voting for me, that would represent a statistical problem right from the very beginning. Now, I have, as you'll see today, and if you'd been with us yesterday, you would have seen with cherries on top, I have deep support amongst certain sections of the population in London, and that's not going to be represented in any poll.
I see. And have you noticed any of your opposing candidates adopting some of your policies?
Yes, even my slogans, even my, I coined the phrase "a London for all," and about 5 weeks ago, Sadiq Khan stole it and called it "a mayor for all Londoners."
Okay.
So yeah, they've been stealing my policies and stealing my slogans, and that's good. I want to influence the debate and the eventual outcome, and imitation is the sincerest form of flattery.
Well, you've given us an example of how your rhetoric has been adopted by Sadiq Khan, for example. But are there any policies that have been adopted by these candidates?
Yes, on the issue of compulsory purchase and land tax on vacant properties, Labour has begun to edge towards that. First Tessa Jowell, who lost the Labour nomination, and now the official Labour campaign team. My idea of a People's Power energy company to bulk buy gas and electricity on behalf of this city of 8 million people. You can make good deals buying gas and electricity for 8 million people. That too has begun to move into mainstream political discourse.
I see.
You are an opponent of Sadiq Khan, and even you stated that you would be willing to end your campaign if he was dropped as a candidate for Labour. Why are you so opposed to Khan?
Because from the day and hour that Jeremy Corbyn became the leader of the Labour Party, Sadiq Khan has been at the centre of a coup to overthrow the wishes of 60% of the Labour Party's members and millions of Labour supporters in the country. So he's a disloyal, treacherous individual who's ready to stab even his own people in order to please others, in, I think, the vain hope that they might vote for him. So he doesn't deserve to be mayor of London, that's the truth of it.
Okay, well, we would like to come to the topic of potential Brexit, you know, the debate over the European
Sure.
Union. You said that Nigel Farage wants to leave for his own reasons, Boris Johnson for his own reasons, and yourself for your
Sure.
own reasons. So we've heard multiple times the right-wing case for Brexit.
Yes.
What is the left-wing case that you would...
Well, Mr. Tony Benn, who is my political, spiritual father, spent decades adumbrating those, wrote whole books on the matter, gave innumerable speeches on the matter, and nothing has changed. All of Mr. Benn's arguments, why if you can't remove the people who rule you, then you don't live in a democracy, and the EU, to a very substantial extent, rules us, and we can't remove them. We can't remove the European Commission, which is super powerful, and we can't remove, by definition, the governments of 28 other countries. And therefore, we're not actually in control of our own affairs, neither on immigration nor economic policy. The steel industry, for example, we would have been unable to intervene at an earlier stage to save the steel industry, which has been decimated, virtually destroyed, because the European Union doesn't allow you to do so. The articles of the European Union are not amendable, they're not reformable, they're not changeable. And that's not the future we want for our country.
Well, you often describe yourself as a candidate who represents the working class of well, in this case London, but you know, in other cases other
Sure.
electorates.
Sure.
But in this case of a potential Brexit, an estimated 3 million jobs are tied to cooperation with the EU.
Estimated by whom? By
By-
David Cameron and George Osborne? Who would believe their estimates?
Well, you could say that, but I mean, at the same time, a vast majority of businesses and
Well,
all the
well,
biggest
they-
trade unions have said that they want to stay in the Remain campaign. So is it really beneficial for workers?
I
to
believe so.
exit?
I believe so.
For what reasons?
I believe so. I think that the workers in this country have been significantly disadvantaged by membership of the European Union, and if we could get Jeremy Corbyn into Downing Street and out of the EU, we would be able significantly to improve the lot of our people. I'll give you just one example, because I have to save my voice for the public off the top of this bus. The TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which is being secretly negotiated by the EU and the United States government, will mean the end of public services in this country, including the National Health Service, including the services that are dearest to us and on which we depend the most, because they will force us to allow mostly American corporations to bid to run them. And once they've bid to run them, we will no longer have any public services. And the working class people will be the biggest losers in that.
Well, you've mentioned the TTIP deal between the EU and the US. In the case of a Brexit, would you advocate for a free trade deal between the UK and the EU?
Between the UK and the EU, yes, I believe that that's in their interest as well as it's in ours. But I will oppose TTIP whether a British government is trying to implement it or the European Union is trying to implement it. The difference is we can vote a British government out, but we can't vote the European Union out.
Is it wise to leave the EU in the state that it's in today, considering that you could trigger the rise of several Eurosceptic and right-wing parties, such as the FN and presidential right?
The last time I looked, they were doing pretty well before
They were.
the British referendum. Most of the governments of the European Union are right-wing governments, and several of them, an increasing number, are far-right governments. I don't want to be in a club with them.
But don't you think leaving the EU might start separating these countries?
That's
And,
not a logical, if you'll forgive me, that's not a logical question. That's already happening and has been happening for several years. So to blame a Brexit that hasn't happened yet for something that is already underway, that's just illogical.
Well, I think the point we're trying to get across here is the fact that, I mean, we've seen that many far-right parties, such as taking the example of the FN again, have backed a Brexit. Wouldn't the Brexit kind of give legitimacy to the Eurosceptic cause of all these parties?
Well, their legitimacy rests in their own country, and they already have the support that they have in their own country. I promise you, none of them are pondering endlessly on whether Britain's going to leave the European Union or not. I believe the European Union will break up in any case. I believe the Eurozone will break up in any case. It was ill-considered. It was a foolish thing to do. Greece marked the beginning of the end for it, and Greece, when it defaults, as it surely will, on the last package, will probably bring about another Eurozone crisis of enormous magnitude.
Let's talk a bit about Western policies in the Middle East. What do you think of the recent EU deal with Turkey over the deportation of migrants to...
It was a sordid deal. It was a betrayal of the refugees themselves. It was the rewarding of the Turkish government of Erdogan with billions of euros for his so far non-existent efforts to stem the flow of refugees from a crisis that he played a major role in creating. So it's sordid on every level. And the unkindest cut of all was the promise to Turkey that they will get accelerated talks on entry into the EU. Turkey is a country at war, not just with all of its neighbours, but with at least 25% of its own population. The Kurdish people are being massacred and slaughtered in Turkey. We want to bring that into the European Union? That's just insanity.
Following the recent Brussels attacks, you said that those who rule us built this monstrous extremism and continue to sustain it in Syria and elsewhere, and their policies feed its bloodlust. What do you think the reaction should be from Western governments regarding the wave of recent terror attacks?
Well, it has to be handled on two levels. We have to protect ourselves from attack with proper policing, proper intelligence, and the police and the armed forces having the proper equipment and ability to deal with the threat. I'm tough on terrorism. Nobody hates ISIS and Al-Qaeda more than me. But I'm tough on the causes of terrorism too. And that's where the others fall down, because they were all supporters of the very things, the very wars, which brought us to this place. And that's why I say I'm the best person to face this terrorist threat.
And what do you think should be done on the ground in Syria? Who should we support?
Well, I'd be happier if we didn't support anybody at all. I'm against unwarranted intrusions into other people's affairs, as you will have seen from my answer on the EU. They never usually lead to any good, and they very often lead to a very great deal more harm. So I don't want us to support anyone. I want us to stop supporting everyone.
But you have often talked about supporting effective fighting forces in Syria, such as the Kurds, the Peshmerga and the YPG. So would you be considering supporting these kind of groups?
If I'm going to support anyone, I'll support those fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda. But a better policy would be for Britain to keep its nose, very considerable nose, very long historical nose, out of other people's affairs.
Okay. Well, finally, I'd like to ask, well, obviously right now your sights are set on London's mayoral election. What are your next plans? Will they return to Labour under Corbyn? Would that be on the cards?
Well, we'll be lucky if Corbyn's still the leader of the Labour Party by Tuesday week. The future of the Labour Party is completely uncertain at the moment. There has never been in all history a situation like this. 5 days before an important set of elections, Labour is consumed in civil war. A coup has been mounted against its leader, and the candidate for London Mayor is right at the heart of the coup. So nobody knows what lies ahead, and we'll have to see about that. If I'm not elected mayor and Khan is elected mayor, then I will contest his parliamentary constituency in Tooting in very short order.